Well, another morning, another Sunday, rainy, dreary. We had some serious rain last night. Waving at you, Tim, over there in Nebraska, visiting the relatives. Sorry that we couldn't make the connection between here and there, but maybe the next time work out. Because that was a very interesting concept. Always liked that because you're a great guy, awesome member of this group. I'm just saying. Any opportunity to meet somebody from this group or any of our associated groups is a rare honor, and I wish we could have made the connections. This is another one of those ongoing rambling videos of mine because, you know what, sometimes we got to do those things because we got to do those things. Those are the things that everybody sits there and goes, yay or nay. We like it, we hate it, we toss the die to see if we care. Oh, right? We had those conversations before. We talked about encumbrance. We talked about subsistence food. I just had a somewhat conversation about, what makes first edition and second edition. This is a first edition, a later reprint of the first edition book, or 1.0, maybe 1.5, whatever you want to call it. And then I came out with this one, but actually says second edition on there. So technically this could be your first run of 2.0. Some debate about that, right? And then I have a brown one someplace. I can't find it, but it's not unlike this one. It's just this is a newer version, and this is the one that's clearly marked 3.5, the one that I've used pretty heavily for the last decade or so, and considering it's still in really good shape. So, clunky, chunky, way too many sets of rules and variations and versions, and lots of people are saying, we don't need them all to bore. I don't even use them at all. Guess what? We never did! Always from the beginning. Always from the beginning. We took them as guidelines. We used them pretty heavily when we needed to, or we didn't. But the main part was it opened windows into this world that we know and enjoy, this fantasy settings, and opened our imagination, our mind to do stuff and things. But we come a long way from there. So a lot of times we come out with rules and additions and extra things that people now go, we don't really care about. And I say, we didn't always care about them then either. A lot of times it had more to do with the narrative of the game than your story. So if it's not convenient to worry about encumbrance until it is, then don't. If you don't want to be bogged down by looking up all these rules on the nuances of scaling a cliff, don't worry about it. Make a roll check. Don't make a roll check. Do an ad lib. Your characters are successful adventurers. They have no problem scaling the side of a mountain in a high wind and a rainstorm. Or we can just use magic to eliminate a lot of that stuff. So, among those often easily discarded, earliest discarded rules are the rules on travel. Now, there's rules in all the books on movement, and movement can come in various scales. The most common movement is combat. When we're in maneuvering and moving around in combat, and a lot of people utilize, the little miniatures, so we have a map, or we have tokens on a map, and we don't have to detail exactly, I know my character can move this amount, and we can move this angle or this angle, what have you, but we can do it in visual representation, which speeds it up, so we don't have to sit there and quote, I moved 3 this way and 4 that way, whatever. Of course, I'm old enough school that I don't care for the square system that they went to. I much preferred the hex system because it gave you more dimensional movement, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion, just like everything else. And it has a tendency to sometimes get ignored or passed over when everybody comments. And they think, somehow or another, I'm a nut job lunatic, which, enough said. But, hey, overland movement is one of the most commonly discarded basic rule sets that we tend to ignore. We don't care about the encumbrance until we do. We don't care about substance until we do. Or it's not a big deal. So we want to go from here to there. The last thing most players want to do, or GMs want to do, is get bogged down in an overland campaign. where half the fun is getting there, or even better, getting back after everything's done and said. But it depends on the level of game you like to play or the style. I love having movement as part of my campaigns. I want you to make that travel. I went to a lot of effort to create some maps and some world view and regional views and populate these things to some degree. I would like you to see some of it. Take a journey. Ask Tim what it's like to drive halfway across the country in 14 hours. Yeah, it's a long drive. Drove right past the fat man and waved at him because I wasn't a quarter of a mile from the interstate when he drove past. But part of travel is getting there. What carload of kids. I'm sorry, Tim. Those days for me are long over. But I can understand your wife getting tired on the way home and on the way there. Not a problem. I can get that. So we look at the concepts of travel and why we utilize them. Well, for time, it's a way to keep pace and time. It's also a means to whittle down that hoard of gold pieces and stuff that the players tend to grab onto. The dangers of this, though, is the tendency of the players to go off on tangents. So if you give them opportunities, this is one of the common reasons why most GMs, or many GMs, will leapfrog over the movement from here to there. We're just going to have you appear there. And you did all the movement and we're here. Just so they don't get off on a tangent, because it's so easy to do. You can become more invested in some other side plot or this, random plot that appears that the main plot gets suborned. Everybody's no longer caring about going to take care of the evil wizard in his impenetrable tower. We're going to go chase the goblins down the road that took our bag of gold. I'm just, right? And then there's the wear and tear and the time. Well, we only get together once a month or once every 2 weeks, 4 or 5 hours, 3 or 4 hours. I just don't want to dominate all that time with this, that, and the other thing. All this petty seeming stuff. And there's reason why the rules are set up the way they are, that they're not 100% dependent upon each other to be functionable. That they're chapterized or they're sectionized, if you want to look at it. If you want to worry about combat, you deal with the combat rules. You want to deal with magic, you use the magic rules. You want to, you don't worry about the survival rules and things like that until you need to. But the fact that we have them, even if they're old, there's some debate about whether this was from first edition or second edition AD&D. Well, my argument says it's first edition because it does not say second edition up here. And most of the books that came out with second edition actually have that label on it because that's when somebody decided to go, hey, maybe we need to quantify why this is different from this one. But, like I said, this particular book is a companion book. The Dungeoneering Guide. Have a lot of good material in here that do not require translation from version to version. They don't give you a whole slew of dice rolls or modifiers and stuff like that. They're just giving you lots of verbiage on the topics and things that might be considered, worth noting. So when we talk about one of the first chapters in here is dealing with terrain, because terrain is a huge factor when we're dealing with travel. So traveling through a forest is much different than traveling through a mountain. So traveling through a mountainously forested region would be much more of a challenge than either of the other, and so on and so forth. Now, if we toss in things like weather, which is its own set of rules, and I'm going to avoid that for now because I want to come back and address that as another discarded set of rules, right? But, so, when we look at some of those skill sets, and I've seen an evolution. Rob, Gus, and I discussed this, and in some length about how there's been this transition from older stuff to newer stuff, where we've downplayed a lot of these older rules, or eliminated them altogether. And one of those reasonings or transition things was, in the old days, if you looked at your skill set, you had a much broader set of skills than you do in the newer versions. So they've consolidated those skills into proficiencies in some aspects, or feats Some of those old skills became feats or categorized as a proficiency. So now we have, knowing how to set up a campsite, start a fire, and do all this together into one or two things. Where we say survival, you got the survival skill, or the survival feat. We can survive in this condition or that condition, so we don't have to have 10 times as many skills, and we can concentrate our points better, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And it's just like one of the reasons that we saw the evolution of some of the character classes. When you look at both the druid and the ranger, both are distinctly geared for operating in the woods, out in the sticks, in the wilderness. And they have a whole set of extra special maneuvers and rules and skill sets and access to certain types of magic and so on and so forth that help them thrive in those environments. Well, we have a tendency to forget that in some aspects. I've been in a lot of games where somebody's playing a ranger, but they don't in their mind they're playing basically a fighter, because they don't see the ranger for what the ranger is supposed to be. And the druid's even more confusing for a lot of people. I put it as probably the second most misunderstood and complicated character class to play, next to the bard, because so many people misconstrue what a druid is and what a druid's motivations are going to be, and so on and so forth. Sometimes very hard. Some people are natural at it, though. You get a person who's a big naturalist or a nature lover, and they can play it to the hilt, and it's good. But you take a druid out of the wilderness and into the city, they're fish out of water kind of situation, and they forget that. Then we don't see it. It's the same with the barbarian. A lot of people play a very successful barbarian, and then others misconstrue the idea that it's just a hyped up version of a fighter, and they forget the primitive nature of barbarians in certain settings and environments. There you have that. But we talk about eliminating travel. So it's not necessary. We have loads of magic, and some of the original magic for things like teleport and dimensional travel came about as means to speed up travel. Just like there are magic items like magical horseshoes to speed up your steed's travel, so you can travel greater distances in shorter periods of time. And we've seen even more exotic methods of travel through, shadow walking and was a tree traveling through the root system of a forest. If you got the right kind of druidic spells, things like that. But there were other times where this stuff is important too. If you ever done a campaign on the ocean, on the sea, movement has a little bit more value than on the land. For some tactical reasons. And this is where I said I quantify the difference between movement and travel, because movement in the small sense, in the narrow sense, is prevalent, whereas the long distance stuff we tend to do we don't need to worry about. Well, and I'm with that, mostly anyway. But I like to know that I have an understanding of the concept of travel. And for me, though, I always look at that as opportunities lost or flavor lost. But I will also temper it with the realities of my game situation or my group's situation. So once again, if my group's only going to meet once every couple of weeks, we're going to forego a lot of that. But if I'm meeting every week on a regular basis, I might add a little bit more of that travel in there. And this is where the sidebar debate on the concept of random encounters. There's a lot of people who don't like the random encounter charts. They don't totally understand the point behind them, because if a good GM is going to pre-populate whatever the adventure, you're going to have everything planned and plotted, which is fine. But one of the values, in my opinion, of the random encounter charts in connection with travel is that you give this literal sense of chance. And there's several words that come to mind, and I can't pronounce them, and I'm not going to try to bumble my way through them either, that would work here. Some very suave and cool and sophisticated ones that would look great in a printed version, because I got thesaurus, but I can't pull it up because of my tendency to butcher them and to stumble over them as I get tongue-tied. The base concept is having that random situation occur that nobody planned for, including the GM, because the opportunity can come up. And like I said, I've had some well thought out campaigns go off, off track because of these sort of things. But I've also had some not so great campaigns set up go off onto some good tracks because of these sort of things. And having that extra tool in our toolbox gives us an opportunity. So when we're having a fast day or a short day when we just didn't have time to get all the details we wanted on a particular campaign set up, and you will need to stretch the time out, you can suddenly convert back to this travel mode and have an encounter or two, or maybe stop at a local thorp and visit their little wine shop or what have you, and have something happen there. Let it randomly roll. Let the dice roll and see what happens. Now, the downside, of course, is there a downside? I guess it depends. And we get in somehow or another, this always seems to crop up in all these videos or responses to these videos, is this champion of the style of the game. I don't know if those who are narratists don't want to be simulatists, and I'm not pronouncing that right, as Rob would put it. And I understand the concept of both of them. I surely do. But I make the argument that both of them have elements of each other together, because if you've ever totally played a 100% mechanical-based game, you're playing a war game. And in my defense, that was some of the earliest stuff I cut my teeth on. Not only did I buy the early versions of D&D when it first came out, the little box sets, the blue and the red. I never owned the white set. I didn't even know they existed until recent years. I knew there was something, I just didn't know what it was called. I also got into tabletop wargaming with a friend of mine, and there's a huge similarity there. This is one of the, I think, where the lead miniatures and stuff really started to come out and become part of the RPG system of gaming, because it gave us a visual representation on the table, but it also allowed us to speed up a lot of those mechanics on the short term. And when we deal with the long-term stuff, with things like travel, there's value to it and there's not value. So if I make a map and it says it's going to take you X amount of days to travel from here to there, and you can plot for that, you want to do it in installments, or you just want to instantly be there. Well, shoot, you could just put the Wizard's Tower right outside of town, but that doesn't make a good. It makes for a very tiny map, and it doesn't jive in the head of people. Sometimes having that distance involved, even if it's just simulated, or a wink and a nod, we pass it over, still has its point or its purpose in the story, because it implies a long and arduous journey that you made to get here or to get back. That's just my subject and thought on that particular thing. Like it or love it, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, enjoy the game. Play the game as you wish to play it. Play it as your fellow players want to play. On a side note, and yet another but from the fat man, I can't help but think one of the reasons there are so many more players than game masters is in part because it's a different breed of person to start with. These people want to tell a story, share a story. Whether it's a narrative story or it's a simulation, doesn't make a difference. The fact is, we want to share, but we also are willing to put the time and effort into creating, often building a world that, for the lion's share, is only in our hearts and our minds and our heads or in our notebooks, but the players will never get to see, but they're going to know it's there. Without that travel to show them the world that you've created, you miss out on a lot of things. And sometimes you don't. It's just a thought. There is a certain art form in the Japanese culture, and especially in the samurai culture. And I am going to bumble through this because I know it, I know of it, I just can't tell you exactly what it is. But when you see somebody make a rock garden, and that person sits out there carefully grooming the sand and the gravel and placing this rock here and that rock there, or turning it just slightly, or making the wave motions, they do it for a reason, numerous reasons. But there is the element there that you know. So, as an example, there might be a large outcrop of stone or a pile of stones in one corner of this garden or in the center of this garden, and you see the wavy patterns from your angle. In your mind, in your head, you know that the artist has fully encompassed that garden. So beyond the blind spot, beyond that spot nobody can see, you know the waves continue. Because the argument can be made by a lot of people, I don't need these rules. I don't want these rules. There's no place for them in my game. That's true. But for some people, for some players, some game masters, they're going to see that big rock and they're going to feel the void behind it. Because somehow or another, the artistic element is missing or incomplete, even if it's not shown. My 2 cents on that. Game on.